The direction of a life has much to do with the actions taken early on. That's not to say, of course, that anything is set in stone. A child who spent most of their time learning piano may never play as an adult. The child, though, with enough practice and enough work in the piano lessons, will retain a percentage of that information for as long as they remain alive. Like riding a bicycle, certain actions and behaviors take a hold of us in enough practice, and we never completely forget how to perform those acts. Nor do we ever completely forget how it feels. It's a part of the way our psychosomatic learning works. We do it, we feel it, we learn it. And then, years later, when the child who is now long grown brings his or her fingers to the keys, the feeling is not foreign, but faintly familiar. There's another side to this familiarity, though. Certain acts, when they take hold, feel so familiar to us that we start to participate through habit instead of conscious choice. Stronger yet is the action that becomes addictive. So many behaviors and actions that people take either become habitual to a degree or become an addiction, and those who start young in any behavior are much more at risk for developing such an addiction. So, what can one say about illicit acts and behaviors? It's a known fact that certain individuals habituate lying, and there are recognized conditions for people who steal because they always feel the urge to. What then might happen to a young person who exposes themselves to the very psychosomatic world of unprovoked violence? It may be one thing for two brothers to rough each other up in tumultuous years of boyhood, but children outgrow this behavior with enough time. What seems to not expire with the coming of maturity is a predisposition towards violence that is not mutual. Acting as an unopposed aggressor in a very violent manner toward other living things in early childhood is even found as a common trait between serial killers that have shared their life stories. This, and a fascination with the violent deaths that they incur, are sometimes the last familiar feeling that these individuals recognize when they finally reach adulthood. And some of them, sooner or later, return to these behaviors once more. For these individuals, killing becomes a lifestyle, a subconscious matter of fact. For them, murder becomes the norm. Devil We Know contains graphic content and intense subject matter. Listener discretion is advised. Everywhere we look, everywhere we go, every city, every town, every neighborhood, every street, there is a devil we know. This is Devil We Know, and I am your host, Aaron. In the spring of 2012, Israel Keyes found himself at a crossroads. He had been caught on a serious accusation, the kidnapping of an Alaskan barista, Samantha Koenig. He had been arrested because he was obviously guilty. With his access to Samantha's bank account, and the fact that he had used her debit card to regularly withdraw ransom money deposited by her desperate father, Israel had essentially placed his hand in the honeypot without ever taking it out. It seemed like a rookie mistake, but Israel's plan from start to finish had been flawed. He was acting reckless, and a reckless Israel Keyes was the last thing the world needed right now. Luckily, Corporal Brian Henry had found this public enemy when the FBI alerted Texas officials to be on the lookout for the rental car they believed the wanted suspect was using. Found in Lufkin, Texas, Israel was a short time away from being arrested on account of the Alaska driver's license, the gun and stolen bills in his car, and the debit card he possessed that bore Samantha Koenig's name. It wasn't long after this that officials sent Israel all the way back to Anchorage, its frozen base of operations. Israel's careless mistakes in the Koenig case had brought him straight into the arms of the law, and now he had to sit in silence and decide what to do next. The most that law enforcement was able to do in terms of extraditing Israel was to arrest and detain him based on credit card fraud charges, a crime of which he was plainly guilty, as one ATM camera caught him red-handed, standing in front of the rental car he used to commit this crime in several states. Committing access device fraud, as these withdrawals are called, in more than one state gave the FBI jurisdiction over the subject. And so within the Anchorage jail cell he sat, as FBI officials poked and prodded to find his breaking point. It didn't seem likely, on their account, that he was ready to talk yet. In fact, It was a practical silence that kept the FBI on the edges of their seats while Israel considered his future. However, on March 31st, 2012, in the presence of his attorney, Israel began to divulge his actual crime against Samantha. Not only had he abducted her, but now the poor girl was dead on his hand. On April 1st, he delivered his first full confession regarding Samantha's murder, and the police learned the final destination of Samantha's body, in pieces, at the bottom of Mananuska Lake, north of Anchorage. He went to cut the ice atop the lake, dropping the remnants of Samantha's corpse into the cold deep. He then told officials that he took the opportunity to do some ice fishing. It was clear by the way he talked about this murder that Samantha was not his first. Kevin Fieldus, the U.S. Attorney's Alaskan chief of the criminal department, recognized the telltale cadence of an experienced killer's storytelling, and soon after, Israel promised that he had lots more stories to tell. As scary as this individual's actions had been, the police and the FBI now knew that Samantha's murder was only the tip of the criminal iceberg. I will be right back after this quick message.
Hey everyone, it's Jen.
And this is Lindsay.
And we're the hosts of Corpus Delicti.
If true crime is your thing, it's ours too. And we do it with a dash of lightheartedness and a hint of Southern charm.
We cover both well and lesser known cases, and have also started a series where we spend weeks at a time covering cases from certain topics.
Ever wondered why there are so many cruise ship deaths and disappearances? How about how crime has affected history? What about lesser-known serial killers? Corpus Delicti has you covered.
Episodes are released every Tuesday and can be found on your favorite podcatcher.
That's CorpusDelicti. Hope you'll join us soon.
When Israel Keyes was found and taken in by the police, the corresponding authorities in Alaska also took liberty in approaching Israel's homestead on Spur Lane, the house owned by his girlfriend, where they seized Israel's white pickup in addition to taking his girlfriend's vehicle. Israel at this time made a point of establishing silence in regards to his involvement in the case at hand. Others, including his girlfriend, Kimberly Anderson, and his neighbors, vouched for Israel and his innate goodness. Surely, they all attested, there must have been a mistake. Surely Israel wasn't the man that committed this heinous crime. But the crime scene van parked outside Kimberly's house was a telling sign that all was not well on Spur Lane. In the coming months, an exchange of information began between the FBI and Israel Keyes. The FBI, on their part, discussed at length the due process and all the red tape that came with their side of the investigation. Israel understood all of this, and in recognizing his rights, he began to divulge to them the information they had been so craving, piece by piece. In front of their eyes, a convicted killer was sharing his intimate side, discussing his motives, his methods, and the victims themselves. Of course, the back and forth took many hours of interviews to cultivate, and the FBI were aware of their precarious position with Israel. He wanted to tell his stories, sure. He was caught now, and in his mind, the best way to go out was with a bang. He had expressed, in fact, that this ideal ending would have been in a police shootout, dying in a blaze of glory, so to speak. He mentioned this idea in one of his psychological evaluation sessions, with a wistful look in his eye for the romantic thoughts he conjured of his own bloody demise. Since this was no longer a possibility for him, he wanted justice served on a silver platter, an execution, a death sentence, rather than living out his days in prison. In fact, without saying so, it was clear to the investigators in the way that he handled his potential information for them that his ideal plan was meant to keep him in prison only as long as he had to. It was in exchange for this end that he began to share his past with the FBI, provided that they keep his misdeeds shared publicly to a minimum. Monster though he was, he had high hopes that his daughter would never learn the more despicable things he had done. This hot button, which he willingly gave to his captors, was the key to Israel's long, unsettling string of confessions. For a trade of information, Israel was able to secure what he thought were guarantees to keep him and his salacious, sadistic criminal activities out of the limelight for the foreseeable future. His confirmations then began, as he shared that he had killed, by his story so far, at least 8 people, which was an unsettling prospect for all the officials present. In addition, his ability to commit these crimes undetected for about 14 years made him nearly impossible to pinpoint by further investigations. Throughout the many tedious hours of recorded interviews, only a few hours provide fruitful. The rest, the stuff available to all media consumers, recounts what Israel and his investigators discussed in regard to the red tape that so complicated their ability to barter with him. Paperwork and the shameful gophering for a murder took precedence as the FBI struggled to worm information out of the highly controlling Israel Keys. And with Israel, patience was indeed a virtue. Before the end of their investigation, Israel had made a few moves and had traded a bit with the FBI. Firstly, he gave locations of certain dead drops where he kept his kill kits, or large bags of money, weaponry, and other essentials that he had strategically hidden throughout the United States for his own personal use. With these kits placed and hidden like so, Israel was able to maneuver his killing sprees throughout the entire country at will as he flew to a given destination and took a rental car out to his dead drops. He was able to avoid flying the weapons and stolen bills this way, and kept up this aspect of his criminal lifestyle with the perpetuating acts of robbery that he committed in several states. Secondly, he gave the investigators his methods of execution and disposals of bodies, including the notorious mystery murder, in which he tied the remains to full jugs and dumped them into a lake. He mentioned preferring to strangle victims, and he eventually relented when FBI asked him in November of the same year if he'd shot any victims. He said that there was only one. The fact, of course, brought investigators to one other fact that Israel was able to share during his time in the interviews. You see, Israel maintained this control for quite some time, never really dishing out full details of any one crime after his first confession. Except for one other. Mostly important, though, Israel gave names. He didn't give names of places for the most part, at least not yet, and there were no accomplices to name, as Israel acted alone. Specifically, he gave 2 names, the names of victims that he had taken shortly before hitting Anchorage and finding Samantha Koenig. He gave the FBI Bill and Lorraine Currier. The Curriers of Essex, Vermont, were a kind middle-aged couple with careers in healthcare. Bill was a University of Vermont veterinary technician, and Lorraine worked at Fletcher Allen Healthcare in the small community of just over 19,000 citizens. It speaks volumes about these two and their work ethic that when they didn't show up for work and hadn't called on the morning of Thursday, June 9th, 2011, the town immediately began to worry. Diana Smith, Bill's sister, reported them missing, and the search began shortly after the whole town began to beg the question, where are Bill and Lorraine? Although Bill was reserved, the neighbors knew how nice he was, and his wife was also thought of highly. There was mention that the Curriers often welcomed guests into their home, and that they were regular entertainers of their relatives. The big question, though, when it came to what happened, was why there was no indication that they had planned to leave town. The no-call, no-shows at work were out of character for the couple, and their car was found in town, at an apartment complex. As if that weren't enough to be disconcerting for the investigators, the Curriers seemed to have disappeared without taking their regularly prescribed medications. The whole thing stunk of foul play, but nothing could be proven. For almost a year, the town remained perplexed. Then came the admission of guilt from a certain serial killer with a certain amount of free time on his hands in 2012, now that he had been captured and was answering questions from the FBI. Israel Keys relished in his recounting of the night when he chose the house of the Curriers, simply for its attached garage and the house's layout, both of which contributed to an ideal house for some light B&E. Israel had done his homework, even cutting the phone line to test the house for an alarm system of any kind. So when the Curriers slept in their bed, he made his move into the house and turned his attention to the job at hand. When Israel recollected his crimes against the Curriers, he shared it blow by blow with the investigators, whose interest in horror grew with each beat of the story. Here's what Israel shared with the FBI regarding the night he entered the Currier home and approached the sleeping couple, donning a headlamp and ready to attack.
And I had her in the front seat, and her hands were behind her back. I had cable ties on them, and I think I had cable ties on her feet too. And once I had him in there,